welcome back. This is Joel, and in this video we will talk about zero-touch provisioning, right, with SD-WAN. This is a topology which I put together, I think, a year back, or in fact probably a couple of years back, and you can see we have done quite a number of labs using this topology. You can actually get down to my YouTube channel, and you can probably scroll down to the SDN section, and you'll find close to 20 labs or 20 different use cases which we have covered in that series, right? So I just resurrected that same lab up, just did a few changes. So when I did the series, I think we had done extensively with the Vedges, but I think over the last 1.5 years there has been a lot of effort into building the C edges or making the C edges available with the same feature set as Vedges, right? So just to give you a quick glimpse of what we have, right? So let me just use my pen here. Yeah. So what I have is I have like a couple of C edges over here, right? And in fact, there's another C edge here. So these are all CSR 1000Vs. If you want to recreate this lab, probably use the same release what I'm using, 17.3.4a. That's what I'm using, right, for my C edges. And I think for my VIPTEL, I'm using 20.3.4, right? You have very good compatibility in these releases, and it works flawlessly. But basically, yeah, so we have 3 C edges, and then you also have 3 V edges over here. And I have typical SD-WAN setup here, right? Like, so I have my VPN 0, I have my VPN 10, which is like the service VPN. And I've also done a little bit of interesting things like T-lock extension, right? Because you see here, this particular R1 actually has just connectivity only to one transport, correct, which is the internet, whereas this is the MPLS, and R2 has connectivity to only MPLS. So I've extended the internet transport for R2, at the same time done the same thing for R1 as well, that is extended MPLS for R1. So I have covered all of this extensively in the series, T-lock extension being one of the video in the series as well. So you can explore, go back to the channel and look for those things. So that being said, and then I think the other interesting thing is we also have a VRRP template here, right? Because that way you can add some kind of redundancy, right? So pretty much that's it, right? I don't have any kind of policies running and so on right now. So it's pretty much this. So what we are going to do in this today's video is basically, you see there is a new device added here. You can see there's a ZTP server, right, which has been added here, or you can say ZTP server, zero touch provisioning, right? And then you can see I've also added a new site, right, which is 104, right? Till now we have actually explored 101, 102, 103 in my previous videos. In this particular video, we will actually onboard the site, which is 104, and we'll be onboarding this particular edge router, but using zero touch provisioning, right? So that's our exercise, and I'll explain why do I have all of this in a minute. Yeah, I think that's basically the goal, right? That's what we are going to achieve today. Now coming back to my Vmanage. So this is my Vmanage, right? I have, like I said, I've onboarded the rest of the VHs. So you see there are 6 of them. 6 of the control connections are up, right? So we've got like maybe I can click on here. It's loading, but that's fine. So I have my R1 all the way till BR3. So all of them are up, and you can see all the health and everything seems to be fine. We'll come back to the Vmanage in a minute. These I'm actually referring a couple of documents which are Cisco CCO, I mean the Cisco config guides. I'll probably paste the links of these in the description as well. A few things, right? When we talk about zero touch provisioning, right, if you look at any Cisco documents, they don't clearly point out to anything with respect to VH Cloud, right? Because I think officially it is not supported, and it is accepted, right? I mean, because VH Cloud, before talking about that, if you are pretty much new to SD-WAN, VH Clouds are basically your software form factor, right, of routers. So these are basically the ones which you see here on the right side. These 3 are actually your VH routers, and they are basically, they are not hardware form factor, they are basically software built, right? They are virtual routers. Now officially, if you look at any Cisco documentation, you will basically not see the VH Cloud. Like here you see I pulled up a documentation which talks about the ZTP support for VH, and you don't see the VH Cloud, right? So it's basically not officially supported, because when we get to this lab, you will basically see me doing certain things, and you might also think that it is not end-to-end ZTP, right? Because there are probably 1 or 2 extra steps which we will have to do in case of VH Cloud, which we would not do in a hardware router. But that being said, it's a very, very good exercise to kind of try it out and get the expertise and learn about this, right? Okay, the other thing being, like I said, I'll be following a couple of documents. I'll paste the links. There are obviously certain KVRs which have been highlighted in these documents which you can go through. I'll probably paste the links of these, right? That being said, let's probably get to my whiteboard just to talk a little bit about how this whole thing flows, right? Just a bit of theory, probably a couple of minutes, and then we'll get to the configuration, right? So what do we have? Our whole objective is to, what is zero touch provisioning, right, to begin with? Or in Cisco terms, we also call it as PNP, right? You might have heard of ZTP, or you might also in Cisco terms you would have heard it as PNP, which is plug and play, right? Mainly for iOS XE routers, we basically use the terminology called PNP, and the methodology is slightly different. Obviously, we will not be able to cover that today. In this one, we'll be mainly doing the Viptela's ZTP process, right? So that being said, how do we go about this, right? So our whole objective is to get the VH router or the Viptela router onboarded into our overlay network, right, into our SDWAN overlay network with minimal touch or minimal effort. That's the whole idea of ZTP. So what do we have? We have the VH over here, which is fine. So once we have the VH, what else do we have, right? So you saw me showing that I showed you a ZTP server, right? You might ask, what is a ZTP server? Like it's not a common term in the SD-WAN, correct? You might have heard of vSmart, Vmanage, Vbond, and VHS, but what is ZTP, right? So typically the ZTP server is actually nothing new. It's actually a Vbond, right? It's actually a Vbond, right? And then obviously you have the other set of controllers, which is what, you have your, so this ZTP server is a separate Vbond. It's not the existing Vbond in your overlay. So you will have a Vbond in your overlay, you will have a Vmanage in your overlay, and you'll have a vSmart, right? So these three will form the stack of your controllers, right? Minimal, you will at least have one of these in your deployment, and that's mandatory, at least to have one of them. You can obviously have multiple Vmanagers, multiple vSmarts for redundancy, but minimal you need to have one of them, right? But the ZTP server which you see here is actually completely different, or it's a completely different server or a VM, right, which you set up apart from this. So don't get confused that that you can reuse the existing Vbond. No, the existing Vbond will stay as is. You will have to spin up a new Vbond as a ZTP server. But in the underlying architecture is nothing new. It's just your Vbond, right? Now talking about ZTP, right? Like I said, there are different ways to do it. There are multiple ways to do it, and you will have to obviously pick the one which really helps you, or which really kind of like suits your requirements. I think when ZTP kind of started with Viptela, it was more of a SaaS service, right? Because deployment of these controllers in the cloud is a very common deployment of SD-WAN, right? There are so many customers out there. There are many organizations out there who kind of deploy the controllers on the cloud, right? Which is great. So in that case, you don't really need to spin up a ZTP server, right? All you have to do is you have to go work with your Cisco account manager, get the procure your hardware, right? And then the devices will be added to your smart account, right? And there's a very nice integration which happens that you really don't really need to set up a separate ZTP server and stuff. So automatically the Viptela, obviously the edge routers, when they come up, they will talk to the cloud, right? So the ZTP servers are actually sitting in the cloud, so you don't really have to do anything special. But this is a use case which we are talking here is mainly when, for example, your VH device here doesn't have internet connectivity, right? And it just has connectivity to your internal networks. So in that case, how would you do ZTP, right? So to do that, you have to spin up a on-prem ZTP server like the one which I've showed you, right? So step number one, what really ends up happening, right? So step number one is that your VH router, which is here, right, it basically won't have any configuration on it, right? Only thing what we are going to do is this particular interface, right? Which the interface of the Vedge, which is talking to the world, which is connecting to the network, we will enable DHCP on it, right? So because we have enabled DHCP on this interface, it comes up and it gets an IP address from our DHCP server. So DHCP and DNS is actually a very important part of this whole process, right? Keep in mind DHCP and the other one is your DNS, right? So DNS, why? Because we need to add a record in our DNS server for what? ZTP.viptela.com, right? So for this particular host or domain, we need to add a record in our DNS. And where should it point to? It should point to this guy, right? The ZTP server. So when this Vedge basically comes up, what it is going to do is it is going to reach out to the DHCP server and get its DHCP address, whatever is the DHCP address, and then as part of the DHCP, it will also get the DNS information, correct? It will get the DNS server. So it will immediately make a request asking the DNS server where it can find ztp.viptela.com, right? And in our network, it is actually situated where 1.1.0.14. That's our address for the ZTP server. So it will get this address, and once it gets that, right, the Vedge router will start communicating with the ZTP. Okay. Now the ZTP server, you don't want any random device to talk to you, right? So you need some kind of a initial level of authentication here. So what we need to do is this ZTP server will generally be loaded with the list of chassis numbers and serial numbers, and I'll show you what those are. But for a minute, to identify the Vedge routers, what they do is they upload or they add a list of serial numbers and chassis numbers and serial numbers, right, are uploaded to the ZTP server. So when a request comes in, right, this Vedge router will present its chassis number and serial number all the way to the ZTP server. And using that information, the ZTP server will understand that, okay, this is a valid Vedge, right? And it is going to process or proceed with the next steps. Okay. So once it has identified the Vedge router, then the very next thing is it is going to send. So it is going to send the information about what? It is going to tell the Vedge about the actual vBond of that particular overlay, right? Let me use a different color, right? So it is going to reply back saying, hey, I identify you. So now it gives the actual IP address of the vBond, right? So once the Vedge has received the IP address of the vBond, it will just go ahead and create a transient connection. It's a temporary connection to the actual vBond of that particular network, right? So that's why I said the ZTP and the vBond has to be two separate things, right? And obviously it does the same thing. It sets up a connection to the vBond, and then it sends the same thing, right? The chassis and the serial number to the actual vBond as well, right? Now the vBond, what it is going to do is it obviously gets the chassis number and serial number, but unlike the normal deployment of Vedge, the Vedge currently doesn't have a system IP, correct? So the vBond basically for this connection, it is going to use a system IP of 0.0.0.0 because there is no system IP yet, right? The Vedge is literally empty. It doesn't have any configuration. Okay. But the vBond just authenticates like the ZTP did. It basically uses a chassis number and serial number to authenticate. And once that is done, what? It will send, again, what it is going to send. It will send the information about the Vmanage, right? To our, to the Vedge. So it will send the information about Vmanage, right? So the Vedge has now received the information of Vmanage. So what is next, right? So once I have the information about Vmanage, I'll go and establish a new connection to the Vmanage. So let's go there. There you go, right? So Vmanage. Now the Vmanage, right? The Vmanage has the information about the system IP, right? Because we have configured that. So we will do that configuration, but the Vmanage sitting here will have the information about the system IP, which the vBond did not have, but the Vmanage will have it because we actually do that configuration well before, and I'll show you when we do that. But basically it has the system IP. It can't be anything. System IP is not a routable IP, right? It's just a unique identifier, right? Now that it has the system IP, the Vedge router will kind of establish a new connection to the vBond, right? Because the older connection was a transient connection, and it was not to the right, or it was not using the right system IP. So now, because it has received the system IP, it will establish a new connection to the vBond orchestrator, right? And it will also establish a new connection to the Vmanage as well, because now it has received the right information, it knows its identity, it will establish a new connection to the Vmanage. And this is where you can do certain things, like we will not explore that here. You can actually do this in production. You can do certain things like what if your Vmanage is not running the latest software, right? Say it's running some, say, 18.3, and you want the Vmanage to always run, say, 20.1 or some release, right? So you can do the configuration on Vmanage so that when this connection comes up, the Vmanage can instruct the Vedge to kind of upgrade to a proper image, to proper software image. So obviously in that case the Vedge will go for a reboot, but that's fine, right? So all of that happens, if needed. You can do, like I said, you can do a software upgrade, and the Vedge will reboot, and all of that is good, and the Vedge has established connections to Vmanage. And now finally the last thing remaining is the Vmanage will have to send the full configuration to the Vedge, correct? Because the rest of the configuration is very much needed, correct? You might have created some templates on your Vmanage, and we'll actually do that in our demo as well. So those configurations will be finally pushed down to the Vedge. So now Vedge is completely onboarded to your network. It has all the configuration, and because it has all the configuration, it knows which which vBond to talk to, which Vmanage to talk to, which vSmart to talk to, and it is now part of your fabric, right? So that's the whole thing which happens in the backend. Yeah, so I think let's actually get started, right? We can go and deploy this. All right, so just to make sure that I don't have an existing configuration, I'm going to wipe my routers here. So I'm going to wipe my first the ZTP. So let's go. So when you wipe it, it basically removes all the configuration. Let me do the same thing for the BR4 as well, right? So there you go. I've wiped it. Great. What else do we do? So now let me boot up my ZTP server, right? I'll not boot up my BR4 yet, because we still have to do a bit of configuration on the ZTP server, which is nothing but a vBond, right? Just by looking at the symbol here, you will get to know that they're basically the same thing. They're running the same image. Let's wait for a couple of minutes for the ZTP server to come up, and then we'll get started with the configuration. All right, so our ZTP is up, which means we are good to go and configure it. So let me open it up here. There you go, right? So let's start with the step number 1, which is configuring a ZTP. So the default username password is admin. Okay, it will ask you to change the password. You can give a new password if you want, right? So there you go, that's my ZTP server. It's plain and it's fresh, doesn't have anything yet. So let's get into the config, right? Let's do some minimal configuration. Like, let's get into the system, probably put in a host name, which would be something like ZTP1, right? Let's put a system IP, which is very much needed, which is 1.1. Let's use, because our site ID is 255, I'm gonna use that. There you go, that's a system IP. Organization name is very important, right? This has to be very accurate. So I'm going to use the one which I use for my lab. You'll have to use this based on what, based on the vBond profile which you set up, right? Using the smart account and so on. So this is very much useful. Otherwise, obviously your VHS will not come up. So this is going to be my organization name. I think the spelling is correct. Great. What else do we need? Probably the very next thing is you need to first tell this device that you are a vBond, right? You need to tell what is its identity. So it's going to be 1.1.14. that's the IP address of this particular device, and you have to use the, let me do a question mark here, right? So it's local basically tells this particular device that it's actually a vBond, right? But at the same time, you see there is a ZTP server option as well. So let's enable that, because we want this particular device to actually be a ZTP server. Let's also configure a NTP server, because we are doing everything with certificates. So always good to be, good to always have a very standard, consistent time everywhere, right? So I'm gonna prefer probably VPN 0 on this one, right? So I already have an NTP server in my network, so I'm basically using that. The other thing is probably clock time zone, right? So that's something which I like to keep everything. Let me actually come out one sec. So it's going to be clock. Alright, so looks like that's outside again. Okay, clock, time zone, and I think we can use America and Los Angeles. So this again depends on where your whole ZTP configuration is, sorry, whole NTP configuration. Okay, that's good. Next, let's get into the VPN 0, right? Inside VPN 0, first is what do we want? Let's put a default route first. What's our default route going to be? As per my topology, the default route is what is going to be my R internet, right? So this is my first hop. So I'm going to use that, which is, it's going to be different in your network, obviously. So that's my default route, right? And then let's get into the interface, which is gig 0/0, right? This is my interface which I've connected to the network of the ZTP server. And let's enable the tunnel interface. Let's do encapsulation IPsec, right? We'll allow all the services, right? Because we will have to do some, we'll probably have to do a SFTP for the certificate. So let's enable all the services so that it will allow us to do it. IP address, which I think I'll have to get out of that. Yeah, so let's put the IP address, which is going to be 1.1.0.14. I think it's /24. That's my IP address for my network. And let's do a no shut, right? And how do you save anything in SD-WAN? It's command and quit. All right, right? So there you go. That's the minimal configuration that is basically needed. Okay. Let me pull up my Vmanage. Give me one sec. All right. The next thing, what do we have to do? The next thing is we need the root certificate, right? The CA authority, right? The public certificate of the CA authority. If you're using a Cisco, this thing, right? If you're using one of the well-known CA authorities, then I think the Viptela routers or the devices, they do ship with some of the certificates, right? You can do show certificate, root CA, right? And you'll see quite a lot of them, right? But in our case, in our lab, we are actually using a CA, right? A local CA. So that's why we'll have to import it. So what I'm going to do is, in fact, I actually got a bit lazy. So what I've done is I have used my Vmanage as my CA authority, right? So because each of these controllers are nothing but Linux boxes. So you can actually create any or turn any one of them into a CA authority themselves. So I'll get into my Vmanage, right? Let's get into the Vmanage. Okay. There you go. So I'm in the Vmanage. Let's get into the vshell and okay, give me one sec. All right. So I'm in the Vmanage now, and I'm in the vshell actually. Let's do a ls. So I have some old certificates. That's fine. What we need to do is we need to send this rootca.pem file all the way to my ZTP, right? So let's do that. So I'm going to do SCP admin and okay. Admin, and what would be the password? It's sorry, the IP address is going to be or actually I mean actually I can do this even from my ZTP server as well, right? Actually let's do it from here. Either way should work. So I can get into the vshell here and I can do a SCP admin at what is my Vmanage at, it's at 11011, and what is the file name? It is basically rootca.pem. Okay, and where do I want it? I want it in that particular folder. There you go. It's gonna ask me for my password. Let's plug in that. Great, there you go. The file came in. Let's do a ls, and we have the file. Once we have the PEM file, we need to install it. Correct? So let's install that. So it would basically be request. Sorry, we'll have to get out of the vshell. Let's do request. What's the command? It's root cert chain, and we'll have to do an install. Let's get into the folder home admin and root ca. Right, there you go. It'll take a couple of seconds, and there you go. It's installed. Right, so the root certificate is installed. All right, what do we do next? The cool thing about here is you can obviously, like I said, there are different ways to do it. You can at this point you can actually take this ZTP and you can probably add it to the Vmanage, but it is technically not needed, right? Because the ZTP will not do any job of the vBond, right? It will not do any activities of the vBond. It's just going to be the first point of contact for your VH, right? So typically you don't really need it in your Vmanage. So in that case, you will have to generate the CSR, right? So you will have to generate the CSR using the CLI, right? So we'll have to, let's do that. Give me a second. Okay, so let's generate the CSR, which would be, we'll have to use the request command. Let's actually clear the screen a bit so that you guys can see. So let's do a request CSR, and let's do an upload. Which location? Let's push it to home, admin, and we'll have to give a name. So we're gonna call it ZTP.CSR. Okay, so it's gonna ask you for the organization name, right? So you'll have to give the organization name. My mistake. Okay, that's a mistake. Let's do that again. Okay, so let's so always, you know, make sure that the spellings are right when you are putting in the organization name. That's good. Let's put it again. Okay, there you go. So we have the CSR successfully generated. Okay, now we can get to our Vmanage because we have to sign that CSR, correct? So now what I can do is, because like I said, I am using my Vmanage as my CA authority, I'll have to first get that CSR onto my Vmanage. So let's do SCP admin at, I think the password is basically the IP address is 1.1.14, right? That's my ZTP, and the file is called ZTP.CSR, and let's, you know, copy it here. Okay, that failed. Let me see, give me a second. All right, I think that was basically an old key which was there, so I just removed it now. So what I'm going to do is clear the screen a bit. Let's try that again. Okay, there we go. And let's put in the default password, and there it goes. So ZTP has been copied. The ZTP CSR has been copied. You can do ls and you can see it here. All right, so once we have this, what do? We'll have to sign this, right? So I'm going to sign this using a command which I already have prepared. So this is basically a typical command which you use to sign a request, sign a CSR request with your private private key of the CA server, right? So it's basically this one. So it's going to be OpenSSL utility. You have to use the CSR which you just now copied, and you'll have to also use the private key and the public key, right? So once you do that, you can paste it, and it's gonna take a second. Yeah, there you go. So the ZTP.CRT has been generated, right? Now I can quickly go to my ZTP server here, and let's pull this, right? So let's again get to the vShell, because once you sign it, you have to install that signed certificate, right? So I'm going to do SCP admin at 1.1.0.11, all right? And the file is called ZTP.CRT, right? So I'm going to save it here. It's going to ask me for my password. I think that's good. Yeah, there you go. So the file has been copied here. Once the file is copied, you have to install it, right? So let's get out of the vShell here. Let's do request certificate install, and let's do home admin and ZTP.CRT. Don't install the CSR, you have to install the CRT. It will take a couple of seconds, but you see it, you might get a very weird error, but that's fine. Successfully installed. That's what we want to see, right? So that looks good. What do we do next? The next is, there's only one more thing which we have to do, right? If you want to verify that your certificates and everything is installed, you can check show certificate root CA and probably include your organization name. In my case, it is jmendong, so I'm going to just do include, and there you go, right? So my root certificate is installed. Cool. Okay, that's fine. Now the next thing, the last step which we have to do is, like I said, we need to tell my ZTP server about the incoming Vedge, right? We need to tell the ZTP server to anticipate that a particular Vedge is going to come, right? So we need to give the identity information, right? So let's actually prepare that command, right? Let's prepare it down here and then paste it in one shot. So it's basically a command. It's a lengthy command. So I'm going to tell you how to build it, right? So it's going to start with request device add chassis number. What is a chassis number? So for chassis number, you have to get back to your Vmanage, right? Let's go to the Vmanage. Let's go to devices, right? So you have a bunch of devices here, and you can see there are quite of these devices which I have already used, right? So what I'm going to do is let's filter them so that it's very evident what we have used, right? So yeah, there you go, right? So I think in my network I've used 3 VHs and 3 CSRs, right? So let me use something which we haven't used. So let me pick this guy, right? Somewhere at the bottom, or this one, somewhere in the middle, right? So this is the guy which we are going to use. So let me just pull this a little bit to the right side, because that is the chassis number, right? So this is the chassis number. So let's copy that. So we are using the one which starts with E and ends with E4, right? So let's copy that. Let's come back. Let's start preparing our command. So chassis number, we have the chassis number. Great. Next, what do we want? We want the serial number. All right. So what is the serial number? Serial number is again from here, right? Remember to use the serial number from the same chassis, otherwise it will give you an error, right? Let's go. That's the serial number. That's like the token, guys. It's like it's SD-WAN's way of doing OTP, right? Or multi-factor authentication. That's it, right? So yeah, so it's basically a chassis number, and it'll have a unique token which you can use only once, right? Then obviously you need to provide the vbond or the valid vbond information. So that's the command. So vbond IP would follow here, which is 1.1.0.12, and this is not the ZTP server. This is the actual vbond of the organization. Our ZTP is sitting where? On 11014, correct? Cool. So that's good. We are happy with the vbond part. You can also, I think this is not mandatory, but you can provide the port on which it will talk to the vbond. So it is 12346. I think that's the most common port which is used for the communication to vbond. And then you have the organization name, right? So in our case, we know the org name, which is going to be obviously different for different people. In my lab, it is the one which I'm using. Great. So we have the, what happened? Okay, let me just go for a full screen here. Okay, there we go. All right, so we have the vbond. We have the organization name, and finally we would need the root CA, right? So we need to tell where the root CA is sitting, right? So because when the VH comes and the VH is trying to talk to you, you need to authenticate the VH. So obviously you need the root CA for that, right? So in our case, where is our root CA? It's in the home and admin folder, right? So we'll have to tell that. So let's put that piece of the command as well. Okay, let's do that. All right, there you go. That's done, right? So now this is what we have. This is what will go inside. I hope the token is correct. Let me just double verify the token. I think it starts with O and ends with D. Okay, great. So our token is correct. I'm happy with the rest of the stuff. Let's grab this command and let's go and paste it. There is a syntax error. Okay, let's fix that syntax error. So we have the okay, I think there's a syntax error because I missed a keyword called port here, right? So after the IP address, I need to give the port. All right, let's try this again. There we go. See, you should get this message telling successfully added. So we are done with this command. I can remove this command now. So we are good. How do you verify? You can also do something like show ZTP entries. And by doing that, you can see the chassis number, the serial number, the VTOP information, the vbond information, and the organization name, right? So we have everything ready, right? Great. So our ZTP configuration is done. Now all we have to do is probably do a little bit of configuration on Vmanage and the VH. So let's get to the Vmanage first. Meanwhile, so that to save up time, let's actually start our VH as well, right? It won't be doing anything obviously until we do some configuration on it, so we are good. Okay, so coming to our Vmanage, what we need to do is, like I said, we already got the token and the chassis number. That's done. But what I also want to do is, or what I've already done is go to the templates, right? I've already prepared the template which my router should have, right? That is your typical use case, right? Like you might be bringing up a new site, like in our topology, we are bringing up actually a new branch, right? So we have already prepared the configuration well in advance. You don't really need a change window to prepare the configuration, right? So we have already prepared the configuration, and you can see the template BR4 has been kept ready, right? You can actually, this is a typical device template, right? Nothing fancy. You can have a look at it as well. Let me show you. So it has a very basic system template. It has your default stuff, and then you have a VPN 0, VPN interface. There is a VPN 5 and 2, and there is also a service-side VPN, right? That's it. There's nothing very fancy stuff here. Very, very simple template to bring up the branch device. You can prepare your own template based on that, right? So you can look at my videos on creating templates in the series. I've covered that. Okay, so for now, let's assume that we have the we have this template ready, and you can see it is not attached to any device, right? So let's go and do that. Okay, so let's say attach devices. Now you need to be careful here. You need to find the device which you just now added to ZTP, which is this one. The chassis number starting with E1, E13 and ending with 4E4. Let's find that. This one, right? E13, 434. 4E4, sorry. Let's push it here. Let's attach it. Okay. Great. That's good. Now next is we need to provide, so because this template needs some values, right? So in my case, I need to provide some values. Now there are different options again, right? You don't need to literally sit and write the values. There is option here to import some CSV files. If you have already prepared a CSV file, I don't know if I have it here handy. Yes, I have it. Let me show it to you. So this is how a CSV file looks. Okay. So you can see CSV file. It's a comma separated value. You will have basically like a headings, and you'll have the corresponding values, right? So you can have something like that prepared well in advance, and you can just import it. In my case, I'll probably go and manually put the values here. Okay. So yeah, so let's do that. So let's starting with probably do it from bottom. It's easier, right? So the site IDs, I've kept it empty because I want to show you how I'm building my site, right? So the site ID is going to be 104. System IP is going to be 172.16.0.104. That's what I like my system IP to be. Latitude would be, so I want this site to be provisioned somewhere in London. So it's going to be 51.5072, right? So that's the latitude. Longitude is 0.1276, I believe. Okay. Host name is going to be BR4. And what is going to be the IP address? So it's going to be 1.1 104.2/24. Great. Let's also go with the VPN 0 interface. It's going to be gigabit 0/0, and the VPN 10, the service side VPN, is going to be gigabit 0/1. Okay. These are optional fields. The optional I'm going to skip, not really needed. What is the next hop? It's going to be, I think it's going to be 104 if I'm not wrong. Yeah, it's going to be 101.104.1, right? So that's important. And then what is the VPN 5 and 2 interface? That's good. What else do we need? Probably let's come all the way to VRRP. Okay, VRRP, I have a single VH, but still, assuming a future, I'm going to add one more VH. I'm going to do VRRP. VRRP group ID you need to probably put in the priority, which is say 105, and the address, which is 172.17, maybe 4.1. Okay, that's good. And finally, we will also need the IP address for the VPN 10, right, which is 172.17.4.1. I mean, if you're not getting a good picture of why I'm putting some of these values, don't worry. This is very, very specific to your network, right? You might not even have certain things in your template, which is fine. This is very pertaining to my network. You will understand this topology very well if you go through the rest of the videos in the playlist. That being said, I'll also need a sub interface for my topology, because for the service side VPN, which I'm going with gigabit 0/1.10. And that should be enough, guys. So we have all the values which we need. So VRRP is there, 5 and 2 is done. We've got the next hop ready. We've got the VPN 0, VPN 10, and hope the IP addresses are correct. We have latitude, longitude, and everything is good. Okay, let's go and update this. So I'm going to say next. You can even hit the config preview to actually get a quick glimpse of the configuration. There you go. That's the configuration which will get pushed when the device does the ZTP, right? Let's do configure device. So when you do this, right, it will first tell it's in progress, but then it will immediately say the push has been completed, or basically it's going to say the activity is done. There you go, right? So it's going to say done, and it is also going to tell you that the configuration could not be pushed because the device is offline, right? When it comes online, we will push the configuration. All right, great. So that is pretty much that, right? So now let's get to the VH, the last bit of the configuration. Before we get to that, let me also show you, let's actually open this box because it's pretty much new. Right? Let me keep it ready there. But the other thing which I also want to show here is, so you see this is our VH which we are provisioning. It is connected to this particular router, and it is connected via the internet transport. Great. But like I said, we need certain DHCP DNS stuff, right? I explained to you guys while we see here this section, the DHCP DNS part. That's very much needed, right? So that's why I have converted this router, our internet, to DHCP server as well as the DNS server. Let me quickly show you the configuration for doing that, right? So let's actually clear the screen and show run section DHCP and DNS, right? That's it. So what we are doing is we have created a small pool, and we have the default router, and we are providing the DNS information when the VH comes in, and we have also created show run section host, right? So I've created a host entry so that when the router comes in, it can talk to it will basically be redirected, right? So this is the ztp.viptera.com. The DNS entry has been added, so it will be able to talk to the DNS server. So I just did this because I did not want to spend a lot of time creating a DNS server and DHCP server of my own. So I just used the router itself as a DHCP and DNS server. Great, all of that is perfect. The last part, like I said, let's get the VH up and let's demonstrate the whole ZTP happening, right? So for the VH, like I said, typically if you're doing this in a hardware VH, you will not have to do some of these steps, right? Because this is a cloud router, we have to do these extra steps, right? Because I'll actually show that when we get to that, right? So let's first log in. So this is, if you ask me, it is not a pure ZTP. It is ZTP, but with a little bit of manual effort needed, right? Because it is a VH cloud. Okay, so we have logged into that VH router which we want to be provisioned by ZTP. So let's get into like the minimal configuration which we have to probably do is get to the VPN 0. Interface gig 0/0, the tunnel interface, and we will have to allow all services, right? Let's do commit. Why are we allowing all the services? Because we have to literally do a SCP, right? Basically we have to so these are the two steps which I was talking about, right? Step number 1, we have to install the certificate, the CA certificate, right? So let's do that. So we'll do it from the Vmanage. From Vmanage, what we'll do is we'll do a SCP root ca.pem, right? And what's the IP address or username is admin. IP address of my BR4, right? We haven't configured anything, but remember, like I said, let's do show run VPN 0, right? You can see it's doing DHCP, right? So if I do show interfaces tab, you will basically see that it has already received an IP address. There you go, right? So we'll basically use this address to do a SCP, right? So we'll do a SCP of root ca pem. Let's put it in the same location with this. Let's use the same name for the file, and it is going to allow us. I'm gonna say the password. There you go, right? The file got copied. So let's install that, right? Because that's very much important for our subsequent steps to be completed. Root ca, so install, right? Home, admin, and that's the file. Okay, there you go. So on the VH, we have installed the root certificate. Great. Next, what else to be done? Let's also, I think that should be it, right? So this should take care of it. Give me a second. Yeah, so that's it. The root certificate is installed. That's great. So that is step number 1. Okay, that is step number 2. Sorry, like I said, there are 2 steps, right? So we installed the root certificate. I thought I already did that. Okay, so there's one more step which we have to do, right? Because without that, it will not work. What's the step? We need to activate the chassis number. So this is the main reason why VH Cloud you will not be able to do pure ZTP, because this VH Cloud is a cloud router. It's a virtual router, right? So it doesn't have an identity of its own, right? What is the identity? The identity which we just now put on the ZTP, right? This one, the chassis number and the serial number, right? The BR4 literally right now, it doesn't have any identity. It's basically homeless, and it's like it really doesn't know about itself, right? So we need to give an identity, right? And that's what we are going to do. What's the command? Request VH Cloud, right? Activate chassis number, right? The same chassis number from our configuration, right? Here, or basically from the, you can pick it from the devices, and which is the one, let's keep it like this. Yeah, this one, right? The second one which we picked. So it's this one, B4. So let's copy that. Let's come back here. Let's paste it. Let's also then do token, right? And what's the token going to be? The one which is beside it, which is this one. All right. So now you need to observe this though, because it will happen quickly. So now as soon as I hit the enter, what is going to happen is, actually let me do some packet captures to show you guys, right? Give me one sec. Let me pull the packet captures. All right. So I've pulled up a couple of packet captures. On the left hand side is my ZTP server, and the right hand side is my Vbond, right? So right now, because I have not activated the chassis ID, you can see the 104.2 on the left hand side is trying to talk to the ZTP server, but nothing else is happening, right? And on the right hand side, you don't see our VH coming and registering to our actual Vbond. You can see it is talking to the ZTP server, but nothing else is happening. So what I'm going to do now is, let's quickly come here and let's enter this command, right? So now what really happened is we kind of gave an identity to our VH, right? So because of that, on the left hand side, you can see the authentication will go through, and in another few seconds, what we should see is, we should see the 104.2, right? Basically the new VH router should come and register over here on the right hand side, right? So it will take a few seconds. Let's wait. Okay, maybe it was not the latest configuration. So let's come down here. Right, yeah, there you go, right? I can see I just saw something go on the top. There you go, right? So this packet 11104.2, that's basically my new VH, and you can see it is now talking to the Vbond. Great, which means it is doing the job, right? So now let's quickly see what has happened. So it still hasn't pushed the configuration, because what you can see is once it pushes the configuration, the host name will immediately change because of ZTP, right? Because Vmanage is going to push the configuration. Let's come back here and monitor what's happening. Yeah, there you go, right? You can see earlier we had just 3 VHs. Now you have the 4th one, and this is the one, right, which we used. You can see it has automatically gotten provisioned. And if I'm not wrong, let's come back to the screen here. That's the main window. So on the main window, we should actually start seeing, instead of 6 VHs, you can see 7 showing up, and you can see it is actually coming up with some connections still down, or the control connections are partially down because it's probably still trying to build the connections, which is fine. Let's see by hitting the enter command now. Okay, nothing yet. So let's do show run. Okay, so I see the configuration has come in, a bit of the configuration. The host name hasn't changed yet, which is interesting. Let's probably wait for a few seconds. All right, so I had to wait for a couple of minutes, but now I think it's all good. Let's come back to this thing. You can see here, the host name was VH earlier, but once all the configuration was successfully provisioned, you can see it went and changed to BR4, right? So it has all the configurations which we need. You can also probably do show control connections, right? And we should see that it is establishing connections to the vSmart, Vbond, and Vmanage, right? So this is basically how you can do ZTP with VH, right? VH Cloud is obviously something which you can do to practice and to get understanding of how it works, and then kind of use it on the Vedge hardware routers, or basically the Viptela hardware routers, right? Now, also I would request you to explore how to do the same thing with C edges, right? Because they also have a pretty nice streamlined pipeline, streamlined process to do PNP, right? Which is very similar to ZTP. Just a little bit of the workflow is going to be different, but it's a very handy tool or a handy workflow to kind of provision tens or hundreds of routers, especially in small offices and so on, without having to manually sit and configure them. Rather, you just prepare your templates well in advance, and just get the routers online, and when they come online, they will be attached to the right templates, and they're going to get provisioned. You can also do a software upgrade as well, and they're going to come up successfully, right? Hope that was useful, guys. And thanks for watching. Have a good day.